Do you wish you could memorize your pieces quickly and keep them memorized so that you could play for people on the fly? Do you need help memorizing more efficiently so that you can perform with confidence? Well, you're in the right place because today I'm going to share some really valuable memorizing techniques that I personally use. And I've fine-tuned these techniques over my 30-year journey of teaching and performing. Even though I'm a pianist, this video will be helpful for any musician. And if you don't know much about music theory, that's okay because I'm going to give some great tips that require little or no music theory knowledge. I hope you'll stay with me because some of my most unique tips are weaved throughout the video. When we memorize a piece, we can use 4 different techniques to help us with the process. I'm going to talk about each of these techniques and some tricks that I use with examples in the music that will help you strengthen these techniques so that you memorize quickly, efficiently, and more long-term. Memorization technique number 1 is motor memory. This is what happens when you play a piece over and over. Your fingers and hands start to memorize from repetitive movement. You will naturally develop this skill the more you play your piece. But make sure to write in good fingering on the first day of practice. If there's little or no fingering written in, then you're going to play your piece a little differently every time you sit down to practice, and then it will take a lot longer for motor memory to kick in. Also, be careful to practice slow, because if you practice your piece with mistakes, then your fingers can memorize the mistakes. Memorization technique number 2 is aural memory, which is memorizing by sound. We all have our favorite songs that we've listened to over and over, and we know all of the lyrics. We want to know our piece so well that if we stop playing at any point, we could sing what comes next. If you want to strengthen your aural memory, I recommend listening to professional recordings of your piece. And you can do this when you're doing mundane tasks around the house like the dishes or laundry, but it's even more helpful if you watch the music as you listen, because then you're working on aural memory and visual memory, which is the technique I'm going to talk about next. So memorization technique number 3 is visual memory. And this is what happens from looking at your music every day as you learn a piece. Visually, you start to memorize the markings on the music, the notes, the dynamics, the articulations. It's really important to continue to look at the music even after you have your piece memorized. Most of us have a certain degree of a photographic memory, so we don't want to cheat ourselves out of this important memorization technique by not looking at the music after we have the piece memorized. You can strengthen visual memory by starting in random places in the music. You can even try starting in the middle of a measure so that you're forced to read the notes. Memorization technique number 4 is cognitive memory. This simply means that we're using our brains to memorize a piece. There's a lot of ways that you can strengthen this technique. Some of my tips are going to require a little knowledge about scales and chords, but hang in there with me because I'm going to give you some great strategies that require no music theory knowledge. If you're finding this video helpful, give it a thumbs up to support our channel, and consider subscribing if you want to refine your skills as a pianist. My mom and I are both experienced piano teachers, and we create videos on topics for all pianists and in-depth piano lessons on specific classical pieces. It's usually really helpful to identify the key of your piece because you'll notice scales, chords, and arpeggios throughout that belong to the key signature, and that will make your task of memorizing so much easier. This piece is in the key of C minor. So I see a C minor chord here in the first measure, then it's G major, then C minor, then here's a C minor scale going down. So naming the key signature helps me identify a lot of C minor chords and scales throughout the piece, but notice that I'm also naming other chords. It helps me to memorize more easily. I'm very familiar with chords. I already have them memorized. It's also helpful to pencil in any chords and scales and arpeggios that you find in the music. If you don't know music theory and how to identify scales and chords, look for visual patterns in the music and on your instrument. For example, in the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, I noticed that my right hand is skipping 2 keys in between each note for a big portion of this section here. Here, the left-hand octaves spell beg. Here, the notes don't spell anything, but you could create an acronym that would help you remember the notes. C sharp, F sharp, A here, like can't find arpeggio. If I plan to perform a piece in front of an audience, I memorize hands separately as well as hands together so that I really know my piece. This isn't easy, but I promise that you'll notice a lot more patterns and music theory in your music than if you just memorized hands together. In this Chopin waltz, the left-hand notes in measures 41 to 48 are exactly the same as measures 1 through 8. But then measures 49 to the end is slightly different than measures 9 through 16. This is an example of where it's incredibly important to memorize the left hand separately so you really know the similarities and differences of your piece. I also choose to memorize pieces like this hands separately because I don't want to rely solely on motor memory and hope and pray that my left hand knows just how far and where to jump. In my early days of performing, I had some really awful recital experiences. One time I kept getting stuck in the same place and I couldn't figure out how to end the piece, so I just stood up and walked off stage. It took me a while to start performing again, but it was that experience that made me realize that I needed some more secure ways to memorize my pieces. And this next technique I swear by. So I break my piece up into small sections, usually by phrases, and I number each of them as a safety starting spot. And then I practice being able to play them out of order from memory. So I'll play them backwards, and then I'll practice playing the even numbers and then the odd numbers. This one cognitive memorizing technique gives me so much confidence because I know that if I get stuck in a performance, then I can quickly jump to one of these starting spots and continue on. You're probably still wondering how to memorize quickly and keep your pieces memorized. If I'm trying to memorize a piece, I work on the process every day. Even if I only have 10 minutes, I make sure to review the memory work that I did the day before. Our brains need repetition in order to memorize, so don't let too many days go by without memory work, especially if you're trying to memorize quickly. Some of the techniques I've covered so far will take you some time, especially memorizing hands separately. But if you want to feel confident in a performance and memorize long term, then I swear by these techniques. Here's a few bonus tips on how to memorize long term. Break your piece up into small sections and memorize one at a time. If I'm working on a really difficult section and the progress is slow, sometimes I'll jump ahead and I'll start working on a section that's a lot easier to memorize in addition, so that I feel like I am making more progress. This tip seems like a no-brainer, but stay with me here. If you want to keep a piece memorized, you need to play it consistently. Everyone's different, but I personally have to play a piece at least once every few weeks or else I'll forget it. But the good news is that if I lose a piece, it comes back to me really quickly once I start to practice it again. And honestly, if you use the techniques from today's video, you should be able to keep your pieces memorized long term and perform them confidently. If you want to go deeper into performing with confidence, then watch this next video of ours. It's a complete guide on overcoming performance anxiety. I hope to see you there.